Starting off this list in our number 5 spot, we have Project Grudge Report 13. Okay, so I've read quite a few different UFO sighting stories and stories of alleged alien abductions, and this is fully one of the most terrifying that I have ever heard of. So basically, the story starts off in March of 1956 when Air Force Sergeant Jonathan P. Lovett was assisting Major William Cunningham in the White Sands Missile Testing Grounds near Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. The pair were out searching for debris from a recent rocket test when Major Cunningham heard a loud scream. His first thought was that Sergeant Lovett had been bitten by a snake, so he went around to help aid his partner when he allegedly saw something he never expected. He recounted seeing the sergeant being dragged away by some sort of long serpentine arm that had wrapped around his legs. Whatever this creature was, it was connected to a hovering silver disc that was in the air about 15 feet away. The major stood there in horror as he watched this creature and the sergeant retreat into the craft, which then rose vertically into the sky. Of course, he radioed for help, and while he was taken to the hospital for observation, search teams were sent out immediately. It wouldn't happen until 3 days later that they would find the body of Sergeant Lovett, only 10 miles from the site where he was said to have disappeared from. The autopsy performed on him later also only raised more questions than answers, as his body was severely harmed. So of course there was an investigation that happened, and many people claim this investigation was detailed in a 600-page document labeled Project Grudge Report 13. But the problem with this is that no official information on Report 13 exists, and the US government denies its very existence. Though Grudge Reports 1 through 12 have been declassified, along with Report 14, no official mention or accounting of Report 13 exists, and the story solely relies on secondhand accounts of the horrible incident. In our number 4 spot today, we have the cigar-shaped UFO. Okay, so let's set the stage. It's 2:45 a.m. on July 24th, 1948, and there are 20 passengers aboard a twin-engine propeller plane that is at 5,000 feet, being flown from Houston to Atlanta by pilot Clarence S. Childs and co-pilot John B. Whitted. Out of the 20 passengers on board, 19 of them are asleep at these early morning hours, and everything seems to be going as per usual until it wasn't. The 2 pilots and the 1 passenger who was awake all witnessed the same thing about 20 miles southeast of Montgomery, Alabama. About a week after the incident, the pilot explained what he had seen by saying, quote, "It was clear there were no wings present, that it was powered by some jet or other type of power shooting flame from the rear some 50 feet. There were 2 rows of windows which indicated an upper and a lower deck, and from inside these windows a very bright light was glowing. Underneath the ship there was a blue glow of light. By his estimates, he watched the UFO for about 10 seconds before it completely vanished." The co-pilot gave a similar explanation and also added, quote, "The object was cigar-shaped and seemed to be about 100 feet in length. The fuselage appeared to be about 3 times the circumference of a B-29 fuselage. It had 2 rows of windows, an upper and a lower. The windows were very large and seemed square. They were white with light, which seemed to be caused by some type of combustion. I asked Captain Childs what we had just seen, and he said that he didn't know." Well, this is obviously all very strange and peculiar. What has driven UFO enthusiasts even more is the fact that this strange sighting was of course later investigated by the US government, but the results of that investigation have allegedly been mostly destroyed. Does that mean that they found something they aren't willing to share yet? Some believe that perhaps the pilots and the passenger witnessed a secret Soviet spy craft, while others believe it was definitely something of the extraterrestrial variety. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Lubbock incident. On August 25th, 1951 in Lubbock, Texas, a group of scientists from the Texas Technical College were all hanging out in the backyard of geology professor Dr. W.I. Robinson. They were all just chilling, enjoying each other's company, until around 9:20 p.m. when they saw something very strange. It was a V-shaped formation of 15 to 30 bluish-green lights passing overhead. They were completely confused over what it could be, but figured that the lights would likely reappear, which they did. About an hour later, the lights reappeared, and at this point, all of these scientists knew that they had witnessed something exceptionally interesting, but what was it? The scientists weren't the only ones to witness the lights either. About 350 miles away in Albuquerque, New Mexico, an employee of the Atomic Energy Commission's top secret Sandia Corporation, who had a high-level Q security clearance, had been sitting outside with his wife, quote, gazing at the night sky, commenting on how beautiful it was, when both of them were startled at the sight of a huge airplane flying swiftly and silently over their home. On the aft edge of the wings, there were 6 to 8 pairs of soft, glowing bluish lights. There were more sightings as well, all reporting a similar thing. The group of scientists began investigating, tracking the lights, which they witnessed 12 more times. They measured the angle of the lights, they tracked the speed, and they attempted, unsuccessfully, to try and measure the UFO's altitude. Here's the deal with this though. The government did end up investigating, but the official explanation for these lights is the most cryptic message I've ever seen. It read, quote, I thought that the professor's lights might have been some kind of birds reflecting the light from mercury vapor streetlights, but I was wrong. They weren't birds. They weren't refracted light, but they weren't spaceships. The lights that the professor saw have been positively identified as a very commonplace and easily explainable natural phenomena. I can't divulge exactly the way the answer was found because it is an interesting story of how a scientist set up complete instrumentation to track down the lights. Telling the story would lead to his identity, and in exchange for his story, I promised the man complete anonymity. Despite people claiming that the mystery has been solved, by this explanation, people are left with a lot more questions than answers. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Shag Harbor incident. This UFO encounter is often referred to as Canada's Roswell, so I was shocked that I hadn't heard of it before. Basically, this incident took place on October 4th, 1967, when an unknown object crashed into the water near Shag Harbor, which is a tiny town in Nova Scotia. There were at least 11 people who witnessed this object as it crashed, and many people claimed to have heard a whistling sound followed by a loud bang when the crash took place. The witnesses that claimed to have seen the UFO were all doing a bunch of different things at the time. One couple was just sitting on their porch, but the 2 witnesses that really get me are a flight pilot and a ship captain. On Air Canada Flight 305, First Officer Robert Ralph pointed out to Captain Pierre Charbonneau that there was something strange at the left side of the aircraft. They reported an object tracking along on a parallel course a few miles away and described it as a brilliantly lit rectangular object with a string of smaller lights trailing the object. Shortly after they first noticed it, there was a large but silent explosion near the unknown object, and then 2 minutes later there was a second explosion, but this one faded to a blue cloud. As for the ship captain, Captain Leo Howard Mercy, he saw 4 blips on his Decca radar that were totally stationary. This led to him looking up to the sky, and that is when he saw 4 bright objects sitting in a rectangular formation about 28 kilometers from the vessel's window. He wasn't the only one who saw it on board. The entire crew of nearly 20 fishermen stood on deck and watched. A man named Laurie Wickens was another one of the witnesses, and he and some of his friends ended up calling the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because they saw a huge object floating in the Atlantic Ocean about 1,000 feet off of the shore. This is all super weird, and not only the RCMP, but also the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force became involved in investigation, but nothing was ever recovered or found. But it was also revealed that all commercial, private, and military aircrafts along the eastern seaboard were accounted for, so what could have all these witnesses seen? Since they have never officially identified what it was in the official Government of Canada documents, it is listed as a UFO. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Westall incident. Taking it back to 1966, we have the largest mass UFO sighting in Australia that at the time was largely ignored. This incident took place when over 300 students and staff members of a school in Melbourne all witnessed multiple UFOs silently flying through the air before they landed in a nearby field. Well, there's been a ton of speculation about this incident in the many years it's been. One witness account stands out among the rest, and that is the account made by the science teacher from the school, Andrew Greenwood. He was alerted to the UFO event by a hysterical student, and when he went outside to see for himself, everything changed. Previously a skeptic of UFO stories, Andrew's mind was abruptly changed when he saw, as he described it, a round silver object about the size of a car with a metal rod sticking up in the air. He went on to explain that suddenly 5 planes came and surrounded the object, all while more people were gathering to watch. He called what happened next the most amazing flying he has ever seen, explaining that, quote, every time they got too close to the object it would slowly accelerate, then rapidly accelerate, and then move away from them and stop. Then they would take off after it again, and the same thing would happen. This went on for about 20 20 minutes before the mysterious object just vanished. As weird as this all was, what was almost weirder was what happened next. Firstly, the headmaster of the school is said to have tried to put a stop to anyone talking about the incident at all, threatening severe punishment to any student or staff who was caught speaking about it, and when the Royal Australian Air Force contacted him, he refused to talk to them at all about it. There have also been stories of witnesses getting visits from people warning them not to speak of the incident. Andrew explained, quote, when he asked the physical education teacher to describe what she had seen herself so that he could compare it with his own observation, she just wouldn't say anything. Another witness who did talk to Andrew and described what she had seen in great detail, just 30 minutes later refused to speak to him and wouldn't say a word. Was this because of the threats from the headmaster, or was something else going on here? This is definitely one strange UFO story that leaves behind a lot of questions.
Starting off, we have the original Roswell sighting. One simply cannot discuss aliens, UFOs, or anything supernatural without mentioning that fateful summer of 1947. Rancher W.W. Mac Brazel had found wreckage on his property in Lincoln County, New Mexico, roughly 120 kilometers north of Roswell, sometime between mid-June and early July, describing it as rubber strips, tin foil, and thick paper. The ranch had no phone and no radio, leaving Mac completely unaware of the ongoing flying saucer craze, so he gathered the debris and just pushed it under some brush to dispose of it. This was not the first instance of a flying disc spotting in the region, with several stories already being reported to the press that year. On July 5th, Mac drove into Corona, where he heard stories of silvery flying discs, and 2 days later, on July 7th, made the decision to bring the wreckage into the sheriff's office in Roswell. The sheriff called in the Roswell Army Airfield, which assigned the matter to Major Jesse Marcel. Mac brought Major Marcel back to the debris site, and the two gathered up more pieces of rubber and tinfoil, with the Major taking the materials home. On July 8th, Public Information Officer for the Roswell Army, Walter Hott, issued a press release stating that personnel from the field's 509th Operations Group had recovered a flying disc near Roswell. On that same day, Major Marcel took the material to his base commander, Colonel William Blanchard, who reported the findings to General Roger Ramey at Fort Worth Army Airfield. FWAF for short. General Ramey ordered that the material be flown to Fort Worth immediately, leaving Marcel to board a B-29 Superfortress to make the flight. As soon as Marcel brought the material to General Ramey's office, both Ramey and his chief of staff, Colonel Thomas Dubose, identified the material as pieces of a weather balloon kite. The weather officer on duty explained to reporters that ray wind devices were used at around 80 weather stations across the country. The balloons were attached to a 6-pointed reflective device that looked like a silver star. After launch, the balloon would expand with increasing altitude before bursting at around 60,000 feet, with pieces dispersing in their fall to the ground. Now, after the initial newspaper reports of 1947, the Roswell incident faded from public attention for more than 30 years, until the late 1970s, which brings us to February of 1978, when UFO researcher Stanton Friedman interviewed Major Marcel, whose statements contradicted those he made to the press in 1947, saying they wanted some comments from him, but he wasn't at liberty to do that. All he could do was keep his mouth shut. And General Ramey is the one who told the newspapers, the newsman, what it was and to forget about it. It's nothing more than a weather observation balloon. Of course, they both knew differently. Now, while he didn't elaborate on that statement, and I wish he did deny the popular theories at the time of any bodies being found near the debris. After the United States congressional inquiries, the General Accounting Office launched an inquiry and directed the Office of United States Secretary of the Air Force to conduct an internal investigation. A report released in 1994 concluded that the material recovered in 1947 was likely, keyword here, debris from Project Mogul, a military surveillance program employing high-altitude balloons in classified portions of an unclassified New York University project by atmospheric researchers. A scholarly consensus emerged concluding that the military had decided to conceal the true purpose of the crash device, allegedly nuclear test monitoring, and instead inform the public that the crash was of a weather balloon. The balloon had allegedly been launched from Alamogordo, Army Airfield a month earlier, carrying a radar reflector and classified Project Mogul sensors for experimental monitoring of Soviet nuclear testing. The Air Force reports were dismissed by UFO experts as being either disinformation or simply implausible. Yeah. Now, the scary part about all of this for me is counting how many times the government has changed its tale, expecting the general public to believe them each time. Which story do you believe? In fourth place, we have an anonymous report from 2013 from Athens, Texas. A retired military firefighter and commercial pilot, who was also a former astronaut, submitted his account of what happened around 10:15 p.m. on the evening of July 5, 2013, to the National UFO Reporting Center, also known as Newfork. He reported that he and his family were sitting outside, and when he looked up into the sky, he observed a fairly large orange glowing orb moving rapidly overhead at around 90 degrees of elevation. A minute or two later, his whole family spotted a group of 3 similar objects along the same flight path as the first one. The objects allegedly gave off no sound and seemed to glow from atmospheric heating. He and his family attempted to record the objects using their iPhones, although the grainy dark video was of no evidential use. A direct quote from him reads, "They moved much faster than orbital satellites, like the International Space Station, or airplanes, but much slower than meteors, and did not change brightness as a meteor would upon entering the atmosphere." So, if a former astronaut and pilot has no explanation for what he witnessed, what the heck was it? In the middle of our list today, we're discussing a San Antonio spotting of 7 donuts in the sky. On May 19th of 1952, an air crew flying an RB-36 reconnaissance aircraft reported spotting a series of, you guessed it, several donut shapes appearing in the sky, and were able to take photographs to accompany their incident report, which can be found in National Archives. The crew of 22 reported flying just north of Sonora when they originally spotted the phenomenon, stating that the plane was headed on a 301-degree heading at 18,000 feet, with relatively calm winds for that altitude. At 8:05 p.m., the objects appeared just to the left of the bomber's nose, at a range estimated by the crew to be around 80 to 120 kilometers ahead. The objects were stacked vertically from approximately 25,000 feet to 60,000 feet. And even with all the photographs and drawings, there is still no definite answer as to what was spotted. In second place, we have the Washington Flap. At 11:40 p.m. on Saturday, July 19th of 1952, Edward Nugent, an air traffic controller at the Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, try saying that 5 times fast, spotted 7 objects on his radar. The objects were around 24 kilometers south-southwest of the city, not following any established flight paths, and no known aircrafts were in that area. Edward's superior, Harry Barnes, a senior air traffic controller at that airport, watched the objects on the radarscope, later writing that they knew immediately that a very strange situation existed. Their movements were completely radical compared to those of any ordinary aircraft they knew of. Harry had 2 controllers check Edward's radar, and they found it was working pretty normally. He then called the National Airport's radar-equipped control tower, and the controllers there said that they had unidentified blips on their radar screen, and that a hovering bright light in the sky was moving at speeds they couldn't understand. Now at this point, other objects appeared in all sectors of the radar scope, and when they moved over the White House and the United States Capitol, Harry then called the Andrews Air Force Base, which was located around 10 miles away. Although they reported that they had no unusual objects on their radar, an airman soon called the base's control tower to report the sighting of a strange object. Airman William Brady, who was in the tower, saw an object that appeared to be an orange ball of fire, trailing a tail, saying it was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Now, where have I said that? Oh yeah. As William tried to alert the other personnel in the tower, the strange object took off at an unbelievable speed. On one of National Airport's runways, pilot S.C. Pierman was waiting in the cockpit of his plane for permission to take off. After spotting what he believed to be a meteor, he was told that the control tower's radar had detected unknown objects closing in on his position. Pierman observed 6 objects that he described as white, tailless, fast-moving lights over a 14-minute period. He was in radio contact with Harry during his sighting, and Harry later reported that each sighting coincided with a pip that could be seen near his plane. When he reported that the light streaked off at a high speed, it disappeared on their scope. Now meanwhile, back at the Andrews Air Force Base, Staff Sergeant Charles Davenport observed an orange-red light to the south, where the light would appear to stand still, then make an abrupt change in direction and altitude, with the phenomena happening over several times. At one point, both radar centers at National Airport and the radar at Andrews Air Force Base were tracking an object hovering over a radio beacon. The object vanished in all 3 radar centers at the same time. At 3 a.m., shortly before 2 United States Air Force F-94 Starfire jet fighters, I'm really getting to know my airplanes today, from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware arrived over Washington. All of the objects vanished from the radar at National Airport. However, when the jets ran low on fuel and left, the objects returned, which convinced Harry that the UFOs were monitoring radio traffic and behaving accordingly. Now, the objects were last detected by radar at 5:30 a.m. The government later tried dismissing the events of that day on a temperature blip, but those who were present have been adamant otherwise. In first place, we have the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. Yeah, I know I said I'd be talking about UFO sightings today, but this event is a combination sighting and abduction that I couldn't leave off the list. The Hills were a married couple that lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Barney was employed by the United States Postal Service, while Betty was a social worker. They were active in the local Unitarian congregation, members of the NAACP, and Barney sat on a local board of the United States Commission on Civil Rights. Overall, they seem like pretty normal folks, right? The UFO sighting happened at around 10:30 p.m. on September 19th of 1961. The Hills were driving back to their home in Portsmouth from a vacation in Niagara Falls in Montreal. Just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire, Betty noticed a bright point of light in the sky that moved from below the moon in the planet Jupiter upwards to the west of the moon. While Barney was driving, Betty reasoned that she was observing a falling star. Only, it was moving upwards. Because it moved erratically and grew bigger and brighter, Betty convinced Barney to stop their car for a closer look, as well as to walk their dog, Delcy. Barney obliged and stopped at a picnic area just south of Twin Mountain. Now by this point, Betty had dug out her binoculars for a closer look and described seeing an odd-shaped aircraft flashing multicolored lights travel across the face of the moon, believing it to be a flying saucer based off of stories she had heard from her sister. Now taking his turn with the binoculars, Barney thought it was just a commercial plane at first, but soon changed his mind because without looking as if it had turned, the craft rapidly descended in his direction, causing him to realize something was wrong. The Hills said they continued driving on the isolated road, moving very slowly towards Franconia Notch in order to observe the object as it came even closer. At one point, the object passed above a restaurant and signal tower on top of Cannon Mountain and came out near the Old Man of the Mountain. Betty testified that it was at least 1.5 times the length of the granite cliff profile, which was 40 feet long and it seemed to be rotating. At one point, the object descended rapidly towards their vehicle, causing Barney to stop in the middle of the highway. The huge silent craft hovered at around 80 to 100 feet above the Hills' 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air and filled the entire field of view in the windshield. Barry stepped away from the vehicle and moved closer to the object, which he later said was roughly the size of a huge pancake. And that statement right there just made me hungry. Still using the binoculars, Barney claimed to have seen 8 to 11 humanoid figures peering out of the craft's windows, seeming to look right at him. In his report to investigator Walter Webb of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP, Barney described specifically that the beings were somehow not human, but humanoid. In unison, all but one figure moved to what appeared to be a panel on the rear wall of the hallway that encircled the front portion of the craft. The one remaining figure continued to look at Barney and communicated a message to him, saying, "Stay where you are and keep looking." Barney had a recollection of observing the humanoid forms wearing glossy black uniforms and black caps. Red lights on what appeared to be bat wing fins began to telescope out of the sides of the craft, and a long structure descended from the bottom of the aircraft. Now, the silent aircraft approached what Barney estimated was within 50 to 80 feet overhead and 300 feet away from him. Not arriving home until dawn, the Hills stated that they had some odd sensations and impulses they couldn't explain. Now, extremely confused, the Hills said they tried to reconstruct what had exactly happened the night before, but their memories were incomplete and fragmented. Notice I did a little bit of a jump there. That's because we don't know what happened. After sleeping for a few hours, Betty awoke and placed the shoes and clothing she had worn during the drive into her closet, observing that the dress was torn at the hem, zipper, lining, and later noted a pinkish powder on her dress. Now, over the years, 5 different laboratories have conducted chemical and forensic analyses on the dress. This wasn't the only damaged items in their possession. Barney said that the leather strap for the binoculars was torn, but didn't remember how. The toes of his best dress shoes were scraped, and their watches were broken, and no matter what, never worked again. There were shiny concentric circles, so similar to the rings that you would find on a tree trunk on their car's trunk, that had not been there the previous day. Betty and Barney experimented with a compass, noting that when they moved it close to the spots, the needle would whirl rapidly. But when they moved it a few inches away from the shiny spots, it would drop down. 10 days after the UFO encounter, Betty began having a series of vivid dreams, which continued for 5 successive nights. She stated that she experienced them with a degree of detail and intensity that she never had before. And after the 5th night, they stopped and never recurred, although they occupied her thoughts during the day. Determined to recover their lost memories, the Hills opted to partake in hypnosis sessions. Barney recalled driving the car away from the UFO, but afterwards he felt compelled to pull off the road and drive into the woods, eventually spotting 6 men standing on the dirt road. The car stalled, and 3 of the men approached the car, telling Barney not to fear them. He was still anxious, however, and he reported that their leader told him to close his eyes. While hypnotized, Barney said, "I felt like the eyes had pushed into my eyes," a statement he would repeat each session. The best anyone has been able to rebut what happened was claiming stress and sleep deprivation as the cause of what they saw and experienced. I'll admit, I'm usually much more of a skeptic, but this seems pretty dang real to me.
Number 5. Red Eyeball Ship. In January of this year, a man in Spokane, Washington, was in his living room. when he happened to sight a strange alien craft that caused him to question his beliefs and his place in the universe. In his own words, "Our backyard camera recorded this strange object. We put a camera in our backyard because stuff has been coming up missing. But one morning I had the TV on in my living room as I was sitting on our couch. I happened to look up at the TV and saw this strange object. I went out on the back porch and I couldn't see that object at all. But when I went back in the house, it was still there. I went to get my brother to show him what I was seeing. He didn't know what it was, but he was seeing it too. Then it started to move out in the field, where I didn't see it anymore. Then it started to come back towards my backyard. Again, it looks round with a red eyeball in the middle, but I have no clue to this day what it is. I took a couple photos in infrared. If you look in the center of the red, you can see something. Looking at the photos, it is difficult to come up with another explanation for what this strange unidentified flying object could be. Number 4. An American UFO. Our next tale was posted this year, but details an experience from the year 1980. The witness shared his story of seeing a UFO that seemed to be affiliated with the US government, but he also posits a theory about why the government would allow this ship to be seen by the public. I had a sighting in broad daylight in 1980 at around 9 a.m. in early December. My mom and hundreds of other motorists witnessed it as well. We were driving to visit my father at his work in Beverly Hills and were waiting to hop on the freeway in Santa Monica when we saw your classic silver disc. It hovered completely still at about 150 feet or so for 10 solid minutes. Remember, we were crawling, slow as molasses traffic. We got a very good look at this thing. On the underside was stenciled US Air Force. It looked very official, and we assumed it had to be one of ours. Then, after hovering for 10 minutes, it shot off towards the southwest like a bullet. I've never seen anything move so fast in my life. It was shocking, but I have a theory as to what the craft was doing there and why we witnessed it. I don't know how familiar you are with Jimmy Carter on the issue of UFOs, but he is on record as having had a sighting of his own in 1973. Carter was no flake. He had a degree in nuclear physics and is a former naval officer, retired at the rank of lieutenant, which in the Navy is like the Army equivalent of a major. Rank promotions are much harder and time-consuming in the Navy. Anyhow, Carter tried like hell to get disclosure during his presidency. He knew he was being stonewalled. When you think about it, it's unacceptable that the nation's most powerful elected leader cannot declassify something that the public, the world, has a right to know about. But what I've come to believe is that Carter ordered a captured or back-engineered UFO with official Air Force insignia to fly over a populated area, where thousands were waiting in traffic to get on the freeway, so people would ask the questions he couldn't find the answers to. Number 3. Father and son UFO bonding. Next, we have a story from Nova Scotia, where a young man saw an alien craft and panicked. He thought that no one would believe him until his father told him about his own close encounter from years before. Here is his story. My living room at the time had a window above me behind the TV. So, I am watching TV. I don't remember what exactly. It was about 2:30 or 3 a.m. at this point. My father got up to use the washroom and went back to bed. I got up to get a drink and saw something out of the corner of my eye, outside the window and above the high school. I literally could walk outside my house, take 2 steps, and I was on school property. I see this light above the school. I figured it was a meteor shower or space junk. I grabbed the binoculars. I looked out the window to see if I could see it. I couldn't really get a good look. It was too blurry through the window. So I went outside to have a look. It was not very bright in my small town. I look out towards the school. I see something I can only describe as a ball metal, almost like a flowing liquid metal, but to my eyes seemed like it was taking the form of a sphere, condensing in on itself from time to time and rippling, as if the surface rippled like water. The light from it appeared that way. It was circular, bright, white, almost silvery. At times, it seemed that the light coming from it had faded, and I could see that it was a solid sphere, silver in appearance. I do not know how big it would be. I guess would be the size of a 2-seater passenger plane. It darted from above the school to the hospital in a blink of an eye. The distance was about a quarter of a kilometer, but on a somewhat linear path. I had my eyes glued to it, and it blinked out of existence. It is the only way I can describe it. I could no longer see it. I scanned around the sky with the binoculars, then found it was above a church about a full kilometer away. Same strange ball rippling like metal. I was outside for, I believe, 25 to 30 minutes. Based on my coming back in between 3:30 a.m. and 4 a.m. My brain could not comprehend what I was seeing. I literally thought I was dreaming or experiencing some kind of hallucination. I felt as if what I was seeing was straight out of a movie or sci-fi book. It was like it was darting around our entire town at random intervals, going from one part to another within the blink of an eye. The distance it traveled from the school to the hospital to the church is in total 1.4 kilometers. I snapped, and for some reason started crying. I ran to my dad and woke him up. "It's a satellite," is what he said. My father enjoyed watching stuff on UFOs and personally believed the US government covered something up about Roswell, but I never really said too much. He told me to go to sleep. I was terrified, for whatever reason. I was so scared after it. I did not sleep for months unless one of my parents was awake while I fell asleep. I really struggled with whatever I experienced that night for a very long time. It was a horrific experience for me, and hard to even talk about. I had extreme anxiety and depression from it. I was only a teenager, just barely. I found myself being paranoid. I did not want to be alone at all. Anywhere, in the daytime, I would make sure I always knew where someone was. I was never alone. I was so afraid, I started saying prayers. I spent the next 5 years looking at everything I could that was related to UFOs. The sensation I had from it. I felt a oneness kind of, but also so completely overwhelmed with fear. It felt as if my skin was trying to escape my body. My spine burned, and the entire time I was filled with thoughts of, this is amazing, and I'm going to die. I need to get in the house. All the hair on my body was standing up. I was sweating. When I got in the house, my shirt was nearly stuck to me in sweat. My father thought I went outside and got attacked and ran away. I was crying and rambling about some craft in the sky and how it was going to get me. My father told me he never saw anyone so absolutely terrified before, that I was nervous and would look out the windows at night to make sure I was okay. I've never been so afraid in my life of anything. My body was telling me I was going to die. My father didn't like me waking him so I could sleep. My mother, well, was not in the picture. My father's reaction is based off of a sighting he had in the 70s that some people in the town saw. He was ridiculed by people for talking about the craft he saw so close to the ground it looked like it was going to land in the blink of an eye. It darted off and was gone. He said it was circular in shape, like the classic UFO, glowed bright yellow, and had a low hum to it. He doesn't really like talking about it. Number 2. Another father-son tale. Next, we have a story from a man who was not a believer in alien life until one night his young son pointed out something in the night sky to him. In his own words, "I was in my home in Almond, Michigan. That time of year it gets quite dark quite early. It must have been around 8 p.m. My son, who at the time was 12, came running into the house, saying there was a UFO right outside our house. Let me add, at this point, I was not one who believed in UFOs. I went outside and my son pointed south and upwards and said, 'Look.' The funny thing was, at first I didn't see anything, but I did notice it was unusually dark. Then I noticed a very dim light. I suddenly realized that the reason it was so dark was that there was a huge craft right over our driveway. It was at tree level and was moving north at a very slow pace, approximately a slow walking speed. There was a very distinct humming, exactly like a large transformer humming. There was a very dull light in the middle, and as it traveled down our driveway, I made out a row of windows around the craft. The windows looked very large. I remember walking down the driveway with my son. The next thing I remember is standing out in the field north of my house, still looking at the UFO, when suddenly it went from approximately 90 or 100 feet straight up in the sky to where it was a pinpoint of light. It just looked like another star. This happened in under a second. We continued to watch it for quite a while when it took off in a northwesterly direction, like a meteor, and was gone in a second. There are a lot of things I can describe if you are interested, but this is the basic part. I don't feel like I was abducted, but honestly, I do not remember how I got from my driveway and then into the field. Number 1. Bigfoot, Alien Hunter. Our final story is perhaps the most insane sounding story I've ever read. It began when a group of friends went to stay in a cabin in Missoula, Montana. At first, everything seemed normal until they looked to the sky after dinner on their first night, as one of the witnesses reported. Right there, hovering above the meadow at almost the level of the hills off in the distance, it appeared to be a triangular shape / sphere shaped like an arrowhead. It had a flashing red light at each point, and they flashed at the same time. Slowly, the craft started turning until it was pointing right in our direction. We all squealed with nervousness. We all convinced ourselves and each other that it was much too far away and that there was no way it could see us. Jason got up and turned the outside lights off. Then, the object turned off its lights. When Jason turned them back on, it did as well. They did this a few more times, with the craft always copying their actions. Then, with no warning, it just shot forward and then came to a dead stop over top of us, and when it stopped that quickly, it seemed that the momentum made the front end point downwards right at us. The group ran inside and hid, with one of them eventually working up the courage to look out the window, only to see yet another rare sight. Bigfoot. The witness kept quiet about this because, you know, one thing at a time, but that night heard bipedal footsteps on the roof of the cabin. The next morning, two of the friends went to the river to fish, and the others had coffee on the porch, but looked to the tree line and saw the drivers of the alien craft. I saw as clear as day what is commonly called a gray alien. Its big bulbous head was peeking out from behind a tree, and I saw its dark almond-shaped eyes and the tiny nose with two very small holes. I'm not sure if it felt me looking at it, but it slowly moved back behind the tree. At that point, the fishermen came running back, saying that they had crossed paths with Bigfoot again. 40 feet into the woods of mainly ponderosa pine, they saw the Bigfoot. It walked step by step with them, and then it looked over at them and realized they were watching it. That's when it started walking towards them. They started running, and they saw that it was walking as quickly as they ran. When they made it through the woods, they got to a clearing. They ran with everything they had. They said it was dark brown in color and maybe 7 feet tall. Its hair was bushy in spots. Most people go their entire lives without seeing aliens, Bigfoot, or UFOs, so the fact that this trip to the cabin resulted in a hat trick is pretty impressive. If this is true, why was Bigfoot so close to an alien craft? Is he perhaps an alien as well? Is he a Wookiee? Number 5. Alien Gate Crashers. Our first story comes from a man in Zimbabwe who was asleep one night when he woke up to see an alien craft that seemingly had no trouble passing through solid objects. This is his recollection of the event. My name is Johan Reitman, and I farm near Feathersdorp, 150 kilometers from Harare. I am 31 years old. On the 5th of February, I woke up from a bad dream just after midnight, when I heard a car go past. I got up and looked out of the bedroom window, which faces the front of the farm. I watched as two cars passed each other, a strange sight, as there are usually few vehicles to be seen, and none at night. One car pulled into my gate, and I thought immediately, oh no, those guys are coming to pinch my new engine on the borehole. I rubbed my eyes and face to make sure I wasn't still asleep. I looked at the car again. It was long and wide, and made a low humming sound. I could see lights at the back, a row of red lights, and a front light which shone high enough to illuminate the treetops. This car or object stopped at my gate for a good 30 seconds and then drove on as if the gate had been opened, and that was it. It was gone. I took my torch, my rifle, 4 farm workers, and my dogs, and we went out to the gate. Despite the fact that it had just rained, there were no tire tracks or human tracks on the road. As we approached the gate, I could feel heat coming up from the surface of the road, a really oppressive heat radiating from the ground. Even my ears felt flushed with heat, and my workers and I were soaked with perspiration. It was about 12:30 by then, so when we found nothing further, we all went back home. It was only the following morning that it occurred to me that when we reached the gate, it was closed. This meant that the car had disappeared through a closed gate because they had been watching it when it disappeared, and the gate hadn't moved. The next day, I sent one of the farm workers to fetch some sheep who were lost in the bush, and on his way back, he said he saw an object straddling the road. By the time he reached the spot, it was gone, but strangely enough, the sheep would not walk over to the area where the object had been. Instead, they divided around it. Number 4. A UFO crash in Greece. Our next report comes from Georg and Panteloas, who interviewed the witnesses of a UFO crash in Megas Platanos in Greece. The following is quoted directly from his report. At 0300 hours that night, shepherds and some villagers observed a small group of 5 to 6 UFOs approaching the area from the north. One of them had an unstable flight and seemed to be having a problem. Strange lights came out of the UFO's fuselage, but without any noise. As an eyewitness, Shepherd Trantos Karatranos told me suddenly the treble UFO lost altitude and crashed to the ground at a distance of about 500 meters away from him. He didn't hear any noise, but a fire started burning the bushes. Trantos was very afraid to get closer and stayed in his position watching the phenomenon. The rest of the UFOs in this group stopped over the accident spot, and 2 of them landed near the destroyed UFO. In a few minutes, the fire in the bushes was terminated. For the rest of the night till dawn, there was an unusual traffic from the ground to the flying UFOs. Light spots went up and down, probably collecting the pieces of the destroyed UFO and any bodies of the crew. They finished the collection before sunrise, and after that, the rest of the UFOs took off and were lost in the sky. Meanwhile, all the villagers had been awakened and had seen the whole operation. Early in the morning, the villagers went out to the spot where all of this had occurred, and they saw on the ground a burned oval shape in the ground, with a cut pine tree in the center, and very small metallic pieces and pieces of wires around the tree. Some of the people, like Aragus Alavantes, collected a number of these pieces. One strange thing was that at the edges of the burned oval, the fire stopped, like it had been cut by a knife. Some hours later, a team of Hellenic Air Force personnel came into the area and told the villagers that this was nothing serious. Maybe a Soviet satellite crashed or a plane. They took some pieces of the UFO too and left the area. Argyris sent a piece of the UFO to the Space Research Institute in Brussels. That's the story. If you think that we need more information, we can get more, because I have a very good relationship with the people in the village of Megas Plantos. You see, they don't like to talk a lot about this story, because they are afraid that someone will think they are crazy or something. Number 3. An unexpected police sighting. The next story on our list was related by a Lithuanian police chief, whose officers witnessed strange UFO activity that resulted in him having to make the press rounds to reassure the people of his country. As he put it, "I am chief of police in Vilnius, Lithuania. Recently, I had to appear on the radio to explain that 2 policemen who had reported seeing something extraordinary were known to me to be reliable witnesses and were of sound and honest mind. There has been considerable public anxiety about this matter, arising from what I consider to be media hysteria about their official report. Earlier this year, the entire police force was put on alert. The 2 officers stated that they had observed a round, shining object on the main route at around midnight, 10 kilometers from the capital city, near the village of Nemegis. The object was flashing bright light and hovered 20 to 30 meters above the ground. At the same time, you could hear a strange sound, like electricity crackling, they said. The 2 men approached the UFO after watching it for almost half an hour. When they were some 50 meters from it, the object started to move upwards and away from them into the air, then accelerated towards the town. At that point, an alert was put out, and van loads of Rapid Reaction Force police and tracker dogs arrived on the scene, but the UFO had disappeared. We conducted official tests on the area's ground composition, measuring the air's radiation, and took sound recordings. The grass in the area for 10 meters around where the UFO was reported to have been sighted was visibly flattened. Number 2. A Swedish abduction. Our next tale is from a Swedish man who was walking home one night when he suddenly saw a strange light that seemed to instantly transport him to his destination. The following is his story in his own words. Call me Anders. In early March, I left a local election celebration and decided to walk home, about 5 kilometers away. I had a few glasses but was still sober. It was a starry, moonlit night, and I decided to take a shortcut that led over a hill. As I was climbing, a bright light came from behind, which I thought was a fast car. I moved off the road onto the grass verge, and then I realized it was not a car. The light passed right over me, almost touching my head very quick. Then, I found myself immediately outside my home in Lindholmen, ringing the doorbell frantically. When my wife opened the door, she saw that I had a wound in my forehead and my cheek was burnt. The next day, I telephoned the National Defense and was interviewed in detail by 2 investigators. They told me there were other witnesses. A woman cyclist reported seeing a light at the same time I did, and a couple driving nearby saw what they thought was a new water tower with extremely bright lights shining out of its windows. Later, they realized there was no water tower at that spot. I still have a scar on my face to this day. Whenever I touch it, I feel a tingling sensation, and I experience a wonderful feeling of oneness, of unity with the earth itself. Number 1. A strange sighting in Uruguay. Our final tale of the day comes from a police chief in Uruguay who was out with friends when the sights he saw made him a believer. In his own words, "I am Police Chief Miguel Costa, in charge of the force at Melo, Uruguay. On March 10th, I was driving with 2 friends, Armando and Maria Pasa, along a gravel road near Tacuarembó, when a huge oval disc loomed out of the early morning darkness. It was enormous and gleaming, with yellow and orange lights. I stopped the car and purely on impulse flashed the headlights. All of a sudden, the UFO appeared to hesitate and zigzag up and back, as if answering our call. When I started up again, it was following us. I again stopped the car and flashed my lights. Again, the UFO appeared to waver in reply. We drove on once more along the twisting road, and the UFO stayed with us, always about half a kilometer away. This went on for almost 50 kilometers. That's when the strangest thing of all occurred. We were all glued to the windows, watching as the disc suddenly shot towards the ground as if it was going to crash. It stopped 50 to 100 meters from the earth, and we could clearly see its round, dome-like shape with a large flat plate underneath. There was a slight ring of cloud around the dome. The top was reddish, but the bottom was a brilliant glowing white. Inexplicably, the new position of the UFO made us all uneasy, so we turned around and headed back to Tacuarembó, the nearest town. The blazing lights of the UFO remained at a constant distance behind us. I pulled in under some trees, hoping to evade it. We then observed a second disc traveling some distance behind the first. They never touched, but they seemed to be traveling together. They seemed to maneuver up and down until clouds started to form. Then they passed over the top of the clouds and lit them up like a halo. Then they faded, getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared at dawn. They had been with us for 90 minutes. We were all speechless, as we could not believe what we had witnessed. I myself have never believed in UFOs, but I do know that this incident revealed something rare and inexplicable.
Number 5, Bonita Springs, Florida. Our first clip today is going to be coming to us from the UFO subreddit, because really, where else? The UFO subreddit is doing more to get alien content out in the open than any world government is willing to, so if they're not gonna do it, we gotta let the guys online pick up the slack. This clip was posted to us from user Marcus1640, who had this to say. Well, let's roll the clip though first, I think. I was working in my garage, which is about 100 feet west of this camera location, doing the things you do to keep the wife happy. The sky's clear, and out the corner of my eyes, I see this bright ball getting bigger and bigger. It was really bright and then faded away fast. It wasn't a meteor, and I checked planes live, nothing was close. I'm in Florida, so this stuff is pretty common, but this was weird. And no noise. Now in the clip it can be a bit hard to see, so I'll guide you through this, definitely as well because it isn't black and white, which does take away some of it. But we see a bright light up in the sky that comes into frame, hovers around a little bit, it kind of seems like it's scoping out the situation, and then flies out of frame after, I guess, it decides there's nothing happening. Now OP said that the ball of light when he saw it come into frame was this shining, radiant orange, impressively bright in the night sky. Obviously, that doesn't translate super well, so we have to use our imagination just a little bit, you know, close your eyes and imagine it's bright and orange. Wow, what a lovely shade you used. Now some speculation in the comment section of Reddit had people wondering if possibly this could be something like space debris burning up on re-entry, or a satellite reflecting the sunlight down to Earth for but a second. Pretty difficult to tell from here, but that's the way it goes with the paranormal sometimes. Nothing can ever be so easy, and would we really want it to be? I think we should have to fight for it just a little bit. Fight to get the truth out there. And as usual, my friends, if you're looking for more UFO sightings and content, I have a pretty good idea of where you can find more of it. We've got 8 parts worth of UFO sightings from 2023 alone. If you haven't clicked on through yet, you gotta catch up. And if UFO videos aren't your jam and you clicked on this out of accident, we've got loads more scary content for you, ranging from the macabre and mysterious to the outright horrific and hard to believe. Click on through and find something to scream at, and subscribe and help us out. Mean a lot from Old Tay. Number 4, the Netherlands. Our next sighting is going to come to us from the Netherlands. Seems even aliens can't resist hitting up Amsterdam. Let's roll the clip first to get your eyes on it, and then we're going to take a quick listen to the description posted by its witness, who's remained anonymous. Just before 6 p.m. in front of the cinema in Scheveningen? There's no way I'm pronouncing that right. I noticed this object. While viewing this object, it almost did not move at all. In the entire 20 minutes I was there, the object floated very slowly once to the left and right, and then twice up and down. The shape remained exactly the same throughout. The size remained the same regardless of whether or not this object moved up, down, left, or to the right, and there were no lights to be seen on it. Everything was completely black, and it looked like there was a smudge in the sky. In terms of height, this is unfortunately impossible for me to estimate. But there were several people who, like me, took photos and videos. The object was visible for about 20 minutes. Now the video we've included was pretty short. In fact, those 10 seconds were all that was in that video anyway. But when that video was posted to Reddit, it was corroborated by a few other sources who had all seen the same thing and posted similar videos. Meaning, this isn't some CGI trick, or if it is, a lot of people are in on this conspiracy. So what do we think this could possibly be? The usual suspect of it being a strange blimp or a balloon is always a possibility, and I've seen enough of these videos now that I'm always instantly like, this is probably just a balloon, isn't it? But it's still very, very weird. So let me know down below what you think. I love hearing from you guys about what you think on all this. Number 3, Phoenix, Arizona. This next clip was first posted to TikTok, but since being posted there has been making the rounds across the web since it's got UAP enthusiasts like yours truly peering their eyes open and gluing them to the screen. Let's take a look and you all tell me what you think, okay? Now whatever is going on in there is definitely odd. That much I can say with absolute certainty. There's something up there in the clouds that's floating above almost menacingly, maybe that's just me, and it's flashing a light brightly, and I swear it almost looks like it's turning invisible over and over again. The thing seems to be slowly moving across the sky in a way that makes it look like it's scanning the surroundings. Naturally, commenters went a bit wild with this clip, speculating like I am now. Some suggested that this could be something like hyper advanced military technology being tested out in the field, which would definitely be exciting, and honestly, more probable than not, I feel like there's a lot the government don't tell you about what they're working on. The CIA themselves even said that they think most alien sightings in the 50s and 60s were just reports of the U-2 spy craft. Others suggested that this could be something as dull as a civilian drone being flown around in the sky with a lighting rig attached for no other purpose than to drum up attention and get some TikTok views. But do you really think someone would do that? Someone would go on the internet and just lie for attention? I don't know. Meanwhile, more than a few people on the original TikTok were very convinced that this was a proper UAP alien sighting and could have been an alien visitor caught on tape. Comment section, I'm gonna toss this one over to you as always. Me, personally, I'm a little inclined to believe this might be a boring one. This could just be a drone, just because I'm not so sure that our alien visitors would give themselves away so easily by attaching lights to their crafts and letting themselves get identified so easily, but maybe that's what they want us to think. So I'm curious what you all think it could be. Number 2, Scotland. This next clip is gonna be coming to us from Scotland. I like when we have UFOs all across the globe, you know? It makes it seem like we're all in this together. It was originally posted on the UFO subreddit as well. I'll roll an excerpt of the clip and then I'll walk you through the context that the user provided additionally with it. Let's roll it. Okay, Pretty cool stuff, right? So the user posted, there are two objects in the sky moving at a steady speed. They were not massive, I reckon about the size of a Jeep, maybe twice that size at most. Twice the size of a Jeep is pretty big, I think. Definitely smaller than a plane, but a lot bigger than drones. They had no lights, no wings, no windows, and no propellers. They also made no noise. These objects looked much bigger in real life than they did in the video. On film, they appear to be black, but in real life, I would say they had a color similar to a cloud. Not quite white, but not quite gray either. They looked to be spheroid or tic-tac shaped, and they looked solid and metallic. They seemed like they had smoke coming out of them sometimes, but it was hard to know if that was just them moving through the clouds, causing an effect that looked like smoke. In terms of height, they were flying about twice the height of a typical city building, definitely lower than a plane would have. Also, may I just say, as someone who watches a lot of UFO clips, to be able to find one that is clear as day, filmed on a high quality camera, recorded for a good amount of time, and also had a lot of context provided, put this thing in a museum. That is 1 in a billion. I don't even care if these things aren't aliens. Those three qualities are more exciting than aliens to me. Now, when this clip was posted to Reddit, there were a few people speculating that these could be balloons, despite the original poster pointing out that they thought the things were emanating smoke, so it's, no pun intended, a bit up in the air what these things might be. We get reports of cuboid or tic-tac like UFOs a lot in this video series, which does make me think there's something suspicious going on if so many people report on similar objects like that, but we still don't have any answers. I hope we get there someday. I know the truth is out there. Number 1, Hollywood. Our final entry for this video is going to come to us from Hollywood. Even aliens like the tourist hotspots. Let's roll the clip and I'll add the commentary and speculation afterwards, because this one's a good one. There's a reason I saved it for the last. Now, the original poster and uploader stated, "We noticed this huge object in the sky just sitting there by the Hard Rock Casino in Hollywood, Florida." Whoa, 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 stop the track, stop the video. Are there two Hollywoods? I'm a Canadian, so I don't know these things. Is Florida in LA? You guys have to fix that for me. Okay, moving back. Anyway, the object blurred itself out when we started recording it. It was huge. It didn't do much, but it just sort of sat there and blurred itself out. I have tried to Google to find out what it was, but I'm coming up with nothing. It was my husband, my 2 kids, and I who witnessed this together. Now, I gotta admit, this is one of the most compelling bits of UFO evidence I have seen in a minute. Not to throw the other 4 clips under the bus, they're all very lovely in their own way, and I hold them all in my heart dearly, but this one, oh baby, this is the golden ticket. I'm sure there might be a reasonable explanation for it, but on first glance, this thing looks like the definitive flying saucer. Like if you close your eyes and imagine a flying saucer, you start imagining this. It even looks like if you're watching this thing with eagle eyes that the saucer at one point cloaks, and the original poster mentions that it was blurring itself out when they started recording. Very interesting to me. That would explain a lot over the years if aliens have been specifically constructing their crafts to blur them out from being recorded by cell phones. I mean, imagine aliens keep coming to Earth just for like vacation, and they're getting so annoyed that they're trying to just have some fun, be tourists, and people cannot stop taking photos of them, so they're blurring out their crafts. So what do we think, my ghouls and goblins? Is this recording simply too good to be true? Is this movie magic and CGI up there? You do have to wonder why this footage didn't set the internet ablaze, because that looks about as flying saucery as anything could possibly get. Of course, maybe the men in black and the higher ups are trying to scrub this clip from the internet and don't want you to see, and maybe I just got the whole channel in trouble. Number 5, El Cajon, California. Our first clip today comes from the beautiful Californian city of El Cajon. Let's take a look at something strange that was spotted in the sky that's got the locals talking. This clip was captured and posted to Reddit by user Exporius. Oh, Exporius, that's fun to say. Say that at home if you haven't yet. Let's take a look at the clip first. Pretty interesting stuff, huh? Definitely something that makes you want to take another glimpse. When it was posted to Reddit, Exporius sounded off in the comments and offered a little bit of context as to what was going on. Here it is. 3 black spheres appeared overhead my apartment complex in the afternoon in El Cajon, California. The objects were unlike balloons, rotating rotating around each other and seemingly unaffected by the wind. My partner, who you can hear talking in the background about UFOs, agrees that the shapes were moving in an odd formation relative to the wind. They were also flickering in the sky, disappearing in and out of visibility, not at all like the metallic reflection of a Mylar balloon. The objects disappeared shortly after my girlfriend made me stop filming to go inside. Suddenly, the spheres whipped around about 90 degrees and vanished. Oh, his girlfriend made him stop filming to go inside. Imagine we had the perfect evidence of UFOs, but somebody had to stop filming because they had to go unload the dishwasher. Anyway, Explorius finishes off by saying, "Very strange. I have no idea what these are." And neither do we. This clip garnered a lot of attention in the subreddit where it was posted, getting people chatting about what it could possibly be, although with anything like this there were a fair share of skeptics. Some dismissed the sighting as being nothing more than a flock of birds moving in on a particularly strange triangular fashion, while others suspected it could have been drone. What is a bird if not a feathery drone? So what do we think, my fair viewers? Something worth writing a UAP report on, or was this something a real bird brain posted? You let me know down below, okay? And while I've got you, if you're not already subscribed to Top 5 Scary, now would be a great time to fix that mistake. We got loads of UFO clips. I mean, we're on part 7 of this series. You know we got UFO clips. Storytelling, cryptids, monsters, mythologies, terrible stories, stories too good to be real, and stories too real to be good. Stay subscribed, don't miss a scream, but keep watching this video first, okay? Moving on. Number 4, from a pilot. Our next clip was posted by the History Channel, of all places. I guess technically if a UFO did appear to us, that would be like a pretty big part of history, right? Still, it's funny to me that that's where I'm getting my UFO clips these days. This clip isn't some blurry footage shot from somebody staring right up at the sun. Instead, we have a front row seat from a B-320 pilot's cockpit as a pilot over a commercial flight in Colombia saw something truly bizarre that they couldn't explain. Why don't you take a look at this cuboid UAP that looks out of this world. Let's roll the clip. A metallic looking object that's got a bizarre shape, almost looking like somebody's rolling a giant D20 through the sky, comes hurtling into frame. When you slow it down, it does look a lot like a flying cube, so if you were worried about the Borg coming to assimilate us, this might just be that proof confirming that. Now, in the excerpt from the History Channel clip, they theorized that what this could be a probe or a drone of some type for an alien civilization sending out a first wave of scouts before the rest of the party gets here, and this strange object could be one of those drones, trying to sneak on by but being caught on camera. Now, not everyone is as convinced as our friends of the History Channel. More than a few viewers have thought that what that could have been caught in the sky here is nothing more than a balloon, and some strange angles are making it look a lot more alien and cuboid than it really is. So what do we think? Scouts from another civilization coming in to suss out the situation? Or is this clip posted by people who are just full of hot air? I'm getting punny today. Number 3, Arizona. Our next sighting comes to us again from our favorite friend for strange clips of flying objects. You know it and I know it. It's the UFO subreddit. Seeing as how we're on part 7, I think I owe the moderators and users of the UFO subreddit a top 5 Congressional Medal of Honor. There you go. Anyway, this next clip posted by user Giancarlo the Great showcases a UAP caught on camera in Phoenix, Arizona that's got everybody sounding off. Let's roll the clip and see if you can stay silent watching this. Now, it's hard not to see what the original poster was talking about because I'm pretty sure you saw the flashing lights floating eerily in the sky like a beacon. What's kind of funny is that the same day, from the same location, Phoenix, Arizona, another user on Reddit unintentionally recorded another angle of the exact same sighting, or at the very least the same object on a similar trajectory. And in that clip, we can see it pulsating a bit. It looks a little more circular from here. In fact, several commenters across both of these videos commented that they all saw this in Phoenix. So, it's possible that this sighting is bigger than we think, or that there's just not much going on in Phoenix, Arizona. No offense, I've never been, I'm sure it's lovely. I'm not sure which is more likely or which scares me more. Now, I've got to admit, this one's got me raising my eyebrows just a little bit because I can't quite figure it out just yet. Some users on Reddit suggested that they thought what this could be is something being dragged in the sky, with some users suggesting that it looked like something was tethered and this could be a custom drone or a nighttime kite, which, side note, was not something I knew anyone did, but I've since learned is kind of a hobby. I'm now wondering how many years of UFO footage has all just been kites with like LED straps attached to the back of them, because I'm starting to suspect it was most of them. So what do we think? Aliens? kites? Either is possible, really. Number 2, Metapod. Our next clip comes to us from Instagram with the pretty funny caption, Metapod strikes again. You'll see what I mean in a moment. But I will say, this is basic stuff. Everybody knows Metapod can only use harden. 0 out of 10. Go back. Do a lap. Now, we've featured clips from this particular UAP or style of UAP before on this channel, maybe the brand or whoever manufactures these craft, so it's fitting that the caption is Metapod strikes again. Well, this particular thing baffled me the last time I talked about it, and it's baffling us again all the way here, so here it is one more time. Let's roll that clip for you. Now, a quick aside for my viewership who aren't big gamers out there, Metapod is a Pokemon that's shaped like a cocoon, and I can definitely see where this Metapod comparison comes from. That's definitely what this creature looks like some sort of strange cocoon. It seems organic to me in a very weird way, you know? As if unlike a lot of other UAP sightings, this thing is something that's actually alive on its own. It almost looks like it moves a little, you know? Like it wiggles just a little bit, like it's got a little jiggle to it. Are you following me with this? I also feel like it looks a bit like a floating beehive. Maybe this thing is kind of like a Rorschach test. You see what you want to see. Now, the fact that this thing keeps popping up with different sightings definitely has me very curious as to what it could possibly be. Also, if there's any Rick and Morty fans out there, I swear this thing has like the exact same silhouette as the giant head that appears in the Get Swifty episode that asks humanity to show it what it's got. Maybe that's why this thing keeps coming back. We haven't shown it what we've got yet, and nobody has performed Get Swifty for it. So maybe get on that, and maybe we can appease this thing. Number 1, Sean Cahill. Our final clip for us today comes to us from Sean Cahill, a UAP enthusiast and a former Navy serviceman who is a veteran of 20 years, who in his retirement has become a decently big name in the UFO community as we set out there to look for the truth. Why don't you take a look at this clip he posted on Twitter and see if you can spot the UAP hovering up above. They'll circle it in red too, don't worry. Now we get a beautiful look at a mountain range, looks like a Windows XP background, and something very strange floating slowly moving across the horizon. Something flat looking like a disc, looking like a real classic flying saucer looking thing straight out of the movies. Now, at first glance, it's definitely got my attention because it's not often you get UAP clips that are this broad in daylight and this clear in view. I'm used to somebody shaking it around like they put their phone in the drying machine.
Number 5, the boys' school sighting. Our first story comes to us from a teacher at a boys' school in India who took some of his young students stargazing one fateful night when they saw something unexpected flying through the sky. As he put it, "My name is Kanan. I'm a teacher at a boys' school in the village of Mayapura, West Bengal. Last week, I saw something that was what you would call a UFO. It was about 8 p.m. I was sitting outside under the stars with some of the boys. I looked up and saw this very bright blue light overhead. It started from there and it was moving very fast. Then, when it came directly overhead, it seemed to slow down and then stop. It had a tail at the back that started small and became bigger, and very clearly there was a solid object in front of that. It was not at all like a star or a satellite, and it was not very high. I was already staring at it when one boy said, 'What is that, Pradhu?' And then the other boy said, 'What is that? What is that?' We all got up and were looking at it. There were 6 of us. 5 boys and me. My wife was in the kitchen cooking something, and she came out too because we were all shouting. So it was at maybe 1.5 palm trees height from the roof of our hut, which is not very high. It was less than 5 stories above us. We saw it very clearly. Most of them were concentrating on the light. I looked in the front and saw that it was a clear object. It was not a star, and it was not far away. It was right there. And it was also, like, moving around itself, but very slowly. Then it moved slowly away towards the river, where it suddenly picked up speed and disappeared. It was like somebody who slows down to look at something. It was very, very interesting, and the boys kept asking about it. Boys ask all sorts of questions. It was an abnormal thing, and we were completely helpless just looking at it. Did this teacher and his students really witness an alien craft? Or is there some other less interstellar explanation for this strange experience? What do you think? Number 4, the factory observer. Next up, we have a tale from Brazil, where workers at a water treatment station witnessed a UFO of a truly massive scale. This is their story. The other night, I, Roberto Rabello, saw a huge UFO over the city of Cubateo, São Paulo. When I arrived at my job at the ETA water treatment station, there were 3 other fellows watching the phenomenon. It was 12:58 a.m., dawn, and I looked to the north and there was a UFO at low altitude. One of the technicians said that it must be a short circuit in a near energy tower. Then we ascended the tower and realized that the thing we were seeing was not ordinary. The UFO was higher than the energy tower. It had a red light on top and 3 other red lights below, in a triangular shape. The lights did not blink. Seconds later, between the red lights, a lot of flashes. Hundreds of white flashes. Then all disappeared suddenly. I estimated that the UFO was bigger than a soccer field. Then, suddenly, once again, the UFO appeared, just like the first time. But this time, when the flashing lights had turned off, from the UFO, another object, like a yellow ball, came out, which flew in the direction of the COSIPA, a food factory. But the big UFO itself was no longer visible. Again, suddenly for the 3rd time, the UFO appeared, and this time we were able to see a shadow behind it, something triangular. Finally, the UFO moved away in the east direction, passing over the factory. The sighting lasted 20 minutes and was seen by 4 of us technicians. Why are UFOs hovering over our water treatment plants and food factories? Is this part of their studies on our species, or are they seeking out our weak points in preparation for a sinister invasion plot? Let us hope we never have to find out. Number 3. UFO Stalker. Our next story is from Germany and tells the tale of a man and a woman who were out for a drive when they looked to the sky and saw a strange craft that seemed to take strange interest in them. As the husband told it, it was dark and cloudy, no moon, no stars. When we were driving by car through the village named Fredelschla, when my wife glanced at the sky out of the side window, she saw something dark suddenly covering the sky over our car. I drove the car and watched the road, so I saw nothing at this time. 1 minute later, a big rotating object flew down the hill over the meadow and crossed the road just over our car. We only saw the lights, which were in 2 concentric circles, about 10 in the outer, 7 in the inner. The diameter was about 50 meters. There were no colored lights. All lights were white and as bright as the headlights of a car. The rotation speed was about 1.5 rotations per second, so it wasn't easy to watch a single light. The diameter of one light was about half a meter. The object flew at a height of 10 to 20 meters over the fields to a wood, turned by changing its inclination just like an airplane or helicopter has to in order to do a flying curve. It quickly returned back to the road to stop beside our car and fly at the same speed, 100 kilometers per hour. It lifted up, changing its inclination to me so I could see its amazing size. 2 seconds later, it flew over the car to the other side and turned with the same movement to fly over the car again. This repeated 5 or 6 times on our way. Okay, this wasn't all, but should be enough. There was no sound or noise, except the motor of the car. There was no smell. The radio was turned off. The maximum speed of the object was about 400 to 500 kilometers an hour. The observed acceleration 2 to 3 G. I know my speed, 100 kilometers an hour, know the points where the object crossed the road and the distance between these points, and I calculated the rest. It's impossible that this was a projection on the cloudy sky. When I looked out the side window, I couldn't see the sky, only the hill. Why do alien craft seem to take such a consistent interest in common drivers? No different from any others on the road. What are they hoping to learn about our species? And how close are they to figuring it out? Number 2, the Chinese air chase. Our next story comes from a Chinese air base commander whose subordinates had an aerial encounter with a UFO that evaded and toyed with them until the jet pilots got frustrated and aggressive with the extraterrestrial craft. In the words of the colonel himself, "I am Colonel Lee, commander of the air base in Changzhou, where the military flight training academy is located. One day, 4 radar stations reported the presence of an unidentified hovering over the academy. After ascertaining that the intruder was not a military or civilian flight, I ordered 6 jet fighters to take off and intercept the UFO. At least 140 people on the ground saw the object. To observers at the base, the UFO first appeared to be a small pointed star, and then grew larger and larger, perhaps as it descended to a lower altitude. Witnesses described an object with a mushroom-shaped dome on top and a flat bottom, covered with bright, constantly rotating lights. The crew of the interceptors consisted of a pilot and a radar officer. The two officers reported that the object clearly resembled descriptions they had seen in foreign science fiction films. When they got within 4,000 meters of the UFO over King County, it abruptly shot upwards, easily evading subsequent attempts to get closer. The flight crew reported that it appeared to be toying with the plane by repeatedly outdistancing it and then reappearing right over it. The pilot requested permission to fire on the UFO with the plane's automatic 20mm cannon. I denied this permission to shoot and told him to continue to pursue and observe the object. The pilot broke off pursuit at an altitude of 12,000 meters when the plane began running low on fuel. The UFO then apparently disappeared before I could order additional planes to be sent to the area. Why was this alien craft toying with the Chinese military? Was it simply a cosmic prank, or an assessment of the country's combat capabilities in preparation for a potential invasion? Let us hope it doesn't come to that. Number 1. The Polish ambulance chaser. Next on our list is a story from a Polish doctor who was in an ambulance aiding a pregnant woman on her way to the hospital when the ambulance had a close encounter that came a little too close for comfort. As the doctor related the story in his statement, "I am Dr. B. Plasek. In February, a woman named Mrs. Pluta who was pregnant began to experience labor pains and the ambulance was called. She and I, plus the driver and stretcher bearer, were traveling along deserted country roads when we encountered, quite suddenly at 3:15 a.m., a huge crimson globe that came out of the sky and paced the ambulance for about 45 minutes. As we were a team of professional medical workers, our first concern was for the safety of the mother and baby, and we considered the UFO a distracting threat. For this reason, we did not get very emotional at the time. However, when we came to a level crossing, the two attendants in their hut were simply shaking with fear at the sight. We had to halt because the road was blocked by the huge crimson ball. To be more specific, this is what I believe we saw. At first, all of us in the ambulance saw the globe as a big red ball in the sky, some distance away. It looked larger than the full moon and was dark crimson in color. It immediately descended to the treetop height and hovered about 500 meters from the ambulance. 1 second, it hung in the sky at about cloud level. The next, it was seen hovering between two trees on either side of the road in the middle distance. All of us sensed the globe's ominous approach as it cruised towards us at a very low height, following the road. I was always aware that it was never exactly in the sky, but probably not very high above the ground at any time. As our ambulance approached the level crossing, so did the globe, and we each stopped there. The globe was less than a meter above the surface of the road. I got out to speak to the crossing attendants. I said, "Can you see what I see?" They said, "We've been observing it for some time." I went to the ambulance and told the others they cannot help us at all. They're trembling with fear. At that point, Mrs. Pluta's labor contractions became more frequent, and we felt it was urgent to get to the hospital immediately. Since our path was blocked, I decided to call the police. I reported that there was an obstacle in the way and asked them to come immediately. What kind of obstacle, they asked. A UFO, I replied. It was now 4:10 a.m., and all we could do was stay there and stare at the UFO. We had plenty of time to observe it in detail. Its surface displayed curved bands and stripes with a multitude of black lines traversing up and down in irregular patterns. These clear-cut markings reminded me of veins inside the human body. The ambulance driver said they looked to him like a huge net. As we watched, parts of the surface changed color. There appeared to be orange-yellow patches on the deep crimson background. Then, the globe dropped to only about 10 centimeters above the road, constantly changing colors, pulsating, but always with dull, muted tones. Suddenly, it gave off a strong white light that was so bright it reflected on the surface of the road. Out of sheer exasperation, our driver flashed his headlights at it twice. Immediately, inexplicably, it simply vanished. It was 4:15 a.m. At 6:10 a.m., Mrs. Pluta gave birth to a daughter in the hospital. A careful examination of the whole area in daylight revealed nothing. Why was this strange glowing orb showing such an interest in the ambulance? Was it simply the bright flashing lights on the ambulance roof that caught its attention? Or were they aware of the pregnant woman inside and wanted to learn more about how humans are born? We will never know for sure. Number 5. Japan sighting. Our first sighting comes to us from Japan, where a man looked out his window one day in time to see an amazing sight, only for it to disappear before he could get his family to look at it. The following is his story as he related it. My name is Tatsumi Tanaka. I am 42 years old and the owner of a beauty parlor in Inaka City, Gunma Prefecture. Last Sunday, I saw a UFO, and it was the first time such a shocking matter happened to me. I never believed that I would have such an experience, but surprisingly, it happened to me. I was on the second floor of my house and casually looking out the east window when I caught sight of a white object, rather big, the shape impossible to describe, rising softly and perpendicularly from the surface surface of the ground. We see Mount Akagi in the northeast direction, and it was in this direction that the UFO rose, but I could not tell how far away it was. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning. I wondered what it was. I thought at first sight it must be an airship or a balloon. I strained my eyes to see better, but could not understand what it was. After rising straight up, it stayed for a while at a constant height and seemed to become blurred outside. It then turned into the oval shape that is familiar to us from TV or magazines. It was the same object, but not the same shape as before, but the outline was not clear. Soon after, it moved to the right at fast speed. It looked like a low-altitude flight, but it all happened so quickly, and then it just disappeared into the cloudless blue sky. I was so shocked, I fell out of my mind. This thing was so huge, but it disappeared just in a moment. I tried to explain what I saw to my wife and child who were right beside me, but I couldn't. I just pointed and could only shout out in surprise. My wife was very annoyed and said that everyone cannot see UFOs, only some people do and some don't. By then it had disappeared. I was so excited that I went outside with my daughter and searched the sky. But it was too late. I still can't believe I have had such an experience. I will never forget that movement and that speed. Something beyond common sense. It means to me that things exist that we don't understand. Number 4, New Zealand. Next, we have a story from New Zealand where a woman was enjoying a nice day in her yard when she saw a craft unlike anything she'd seen before. This is her story in her own words. My name is Edith Perkins. At 8:30 p.m. Monday, I was doing some chores in our backyard. This is in Bexley, just north of Christchurch, South Island, New Zealand. I saw something in the sky, like a capsule or cigar-shaped object. At first, it had a silver whitish body with a darker gray forked tail. While I looked at it, it was just overhead, seeming to be coming closer. I was facing west. The rounded edges, front and back of the object, called my attention to it initially. Its size appeared to be 10 centimeters long if held at arm's length. I suppose it was about 30,000 feet high, but it seemed very puzzling that there was no jet trail behind it. So, I went indoors to fetch a pair of 7x35 binoculars. My husband joined me and our home care nurse. As we three watched, a very bright light completely covered the object. It did not happen as a flash of light. It seemed to start up and then finish with a burst of light. I was seeing a different rear design on the craft with a forked end to it, and the color was now dark gray. Another burst of light occurred, and the object presented a rim all around the craft, with either intermittent colored lights on the rim, or else the rim was composed of rotating colored lights. These were in tones of reddish orange. This object then flew out over Pegasus Bay towards the northeast. Number 3, Papua New Guinea. Our story from Papua New Guinea involves a young man whose entire community was brought to a chilled hush when a strange craft came to town for a closer look at humanity. As he put it, "My name is Alex James. I live in Pilla Pilla Community, New Guinea. About 7 p.m. last Tuesday, I went with 4 friends to Pilla Pilla Community School for rugby practice. We were going back to our village after dark when we saw some bright lights approaching. There were a lot of people about, some coming back from bathing, and others sitting around eating their dinners. When they saw the light, they all ran inside and locked their doors, except for a few of us who just stood and stared. As the UFO approached us, we heard no sound. The street lights all dimmed just like a torch when the batteries are failing. It hovered over the coconut palms and looked huge. It was oblong in shape. It passed slowly overhead. My friends and I were almost frozen as we watched it. We felt as though we could not move or speak, because we were so shocked by the sight. The bottom of the UFO was oblong shaped, with very bright lights all around the edges. At the top was a pyramid-like shape, with lights around it also. Just bright white. No colors. It was huge and took over 30 minutes to pass by. We checked the time. When it was hovering over us, it seemed to be as bright as day. The whole place was lit up like bright daylight. That's how bright its lights were. Then the object just disappeared in the direction of the mountains near Vuvu. Number 2, Zimbabwe Sighting. Our next tale comes to us from a journalist named Cynthia Hind, who interviewed a teenager named Lloyd, who witnessed not only a strange craft, but alien life forms when he was awoken late one night. The following is quoted directly from her report. At between 1 and 1:30, he woke up, and because he knew it would be quiet at that hour, he decided to do some studying for his exams. Whilst thus engaged, he heard a clicking sound. It continued for some minutes, so Lloyd decided to check what it could be. He opened the front door and looked outside. He could hear the sound coming from up the road, and when he glanced in that direction, he witnessed something very strange. He quickly went outside and hid behind a hedge to get a better view. He was able to observe a small figure about a meter high, with a head head like a rugby ball, dressed in white overalls. On its back, the creature had a small satchel, attached to which was an aerial with a flashing red light. Lloyd was terrified. He told me he was asphyxiated with fear and ran back into the house, jumped into bed, and covered himself with his blankets. He slept fitfully for the rest of the night. At 6 the next morning, he went to look where the creature had walked and found several footprints which he could not identify and which he attributed to the creature. When he arrived at school, he told his friends about seeing a ghost in the night, but one of his friends suggested that it was a UFO. Lloyd is now under the impression that the creature is called a UFO. Number 1. Australia sighting. Our final tale of the day comes from a man by the name of Patrick Knowles. He was on a road trip with his family when they discovered a close encounter more terrifying than he could have possibly imagined. In his own words, it happened on January 20th. My mother, 2 brothers, and I were driving from Perth to Melbourne. We were going to drive straight through in shifts, and we planned to cross the desert at night when the heat wasn't so bad. By 2:30 a.m., we were in the Nullarbor Plain. We stopped for petrol and switched drivers. Sean was driving, and I was in the front seat next to him. The road was empty. Suddenly, we saw a bright yellow light up ahead, and Sean slowed down. As we got closer, the yellow light seemed to be emanating from an egg-shaped object hovering just above ground level. We thought we might be seeing things, but then a caravan passed, going the other way, and it swerved sharply to avoid the luminous egg. The closer we got to it, the more we realized it wasn't a normal vehicle, or a road signal, or anything like that. Sean swerved to avoid it, and we continued on, leaving it behind. Suddenly, the object started towards us. It appeared to accelerate with tremendous speed. We drove on, and it literally chased us. The faster we went to get away from it, the faster this object went after us. I reckon we reached a speed of 125 miles per hour, but it caught up in a matter of seconds. Then Sean made a sudden U-turn and headed back west in the direction of the petrol station. The UFO also turned around. I don't know how the hell it was flying, because it didn't have any wings or anything like wings. It just kept coming after us. Sean made another fast U-turn, heading back towards Melbourne again, but the UFO turned as well and kept pace with the car. In the back seat, everyone was scared. The dogs started barking and whining. Then, suddenly, we were hit. It shot a beam of light out and punctured our back tire. The back tire was on fire. We started sliding across the road. I realized if we braked, we would have to confront the UFO, but Sean didn't have any choice. Then it landed on the roof of the car and picked the car up. It lit up the car like a microwave. The heat was intense. Our hair was standing straight up, and we felt really funny, like we were being dehydrated. It was awful, frightening, like our brains were being sucked out. My fear was that I would be pulled out of my body. I put my hand out of the window and touched something spongy that burned my hand. I thought we were going to die. You could actually feel the car rising in the air. The car began to fill with a thick black fog. It was so hot, and all this soot, this junk started covering us. Our voices started changing. You know how a tape deck sounds when the batteries start to go flat. That's what it was like. Then I passed out. I came to when I heard a tremendous noise like a bang, and our car suddenly dropped back to Earth. Dawn was coming up. The thing just flew away, and that was the last we saw of it. I had to change the tire, and we tried to clean out the black soot. There were marks on the roof of the car. As soon as we could, we drove fast to the nearest roadhouse. We were too shocked to talk for a while. Then we realized we had lost a couple hours' time during the incident. We called the police. The funny thing was, they were already looking for us. Someone, maybe the people in the caravan we passed, had phoned the police anonymously. Their report states that they witnessed our car being picked up off the road and shaken violently. They noticed the car was covered in black ash. The police inspected our car and noted the ash, the bad smell, and the dents on the roof. They were convinced something had occurred. They took us to the hospital, where we were treated for burns and shock.
Number 5. Something falling over Montana. It seems a week's worth of sightings of strange crafts flying over the US and Canada just wasn't enough to fill anyone's appetite for UFO content. There's always something strange afoot or something strange falling from the sky. Just this week over Billings, Montana, residents have been concerned after something mysterious fell from the sky. Footage captured recently shows trails of orange smoke, thick, falling from the sky. Residents have been left in the dark without much official answer as to what had happened, and if this object was connected to these other objects that have been shot down at all. Luckily, through the internet, we're able to take a look at Billings residents' thoughts and concerns through it. On a Reddit thread dedicated to the sighting, multiple users recorded some strange going-ons around the city. Multiple posters reported that there was an increased military presence, with loads of reports of seeing military aircraft flying around overhead for days prior and after. Residents of Billings on a Facebook group asking questions about it noted an increase of unmarked black SUVs around the area as well. Could this be a little cover-up? Do we have a development of a modern-day Roswell on our hands? It's definitely a bit odd amidst all that's currently going on with strange UFO sightings. We haven't really heard so much as a word about this on mainstream news stations, or maybe they think we've all just had enough of UFO coverage. Well, not us, not Top 5 Scary. Personally, I'll be watching this with great interest. So I'll pass this one on to you guys though. What do we think exactly is going on here? Any Montana natives who might be able to help us out just a little bit? Because it strikes me as extremely odd. What do we think here? Alien craft? Recovered drone? Military testing? Glitch in the Matrix? Mothman? All of these are seeming equally likely right now. And if you just cannot get enough UFO footage, hey, don't worry, neither can we. We've got videos on UFOs, aliens, NASA conspiracies and cover-ups, and tons of true stories absolutely out of this world. Not your scene? No problem. We got loads on the channel and something scary for the whole family. So take a look, subscribe, and stay scared. But stay watching this video because I got more UFOs for you. Number 4, floating beehive. Now our next clip's origins is a little bit disputed and it's a bit of a mystery as to when and where exactly it was sighted. But what most people can agree on is just how bizarre this footage is. So why don't you take a look with me. This object has been alleged to have been spotted over Denver, but it's also been alleged to have been seen over Spain. Entirely possible it's been over both. This footage has been stabilized and cleaned up as much as possible to try and provide a clear look at whatever is floating around up there, and well, I have no idea whatsoever. It kind of looks like a floating beehive that almost seems like it's got a combustion inside of it. It looks like something is erupting in a flame. And maybe it's just me and my own tired eyes, but it almost looks like whatever this thing is twisting shape and contorting midair in a way that almost makes it seem organic. Now, what I like about this clip is how different whatever this thing is looks like compared to most UFO, UAP footage I've seen out there. More than a few commenters pointed out that they think it looks like a stone face, with a bunch referencing that one episode of Rick and Morty with all the giant alien heads that come to Earth and they do the Get Swifty song. It's a good one, to be fair. Definitely a fair comparison. Unfortunately, even with stabilization and enhancement and cleaning up the video, it's still extremely difficult to ascertain just what exactly it is we're dealing with here. Doesn't seem human in origin, and it definitely seems like it's something that could have been out of this world. So, if anyone's got any insight onto this thing, please point us towards it. Number 3, the floating cigar. I got another bit of stabilized footage of something strange in the air from Reddit for you. Check out our next clip. And may I say a big thank you to the folks out there who are stabilizing their UFO footage. That is leaps and bounds ahead of what we've been doing with UFO stuff for years. No wonder we're making such strides in recent years. This clip was posted to Reddit from a user whose account has now been deleted. Deleted by choice or silenced. Maybe clear your browser history after watching this video, just to be safe. Hey, you should probably do that anyway. I'm not judging you, but you know, make sure. Anyway, let's get to the clip. Take a look. This is definitely one of the more bizarre UFO clips I've seen in a minute, and I spend literally all day in an office watching bizarre UFO clips, so I think that ought to count for something. When you think of a UFO, you kind of think of a flying saucer, cute little dome up top. Or maybe you think of like a cool sci-fi looking fighter jet, but I think very seldom do you think of a floating cylinder going through the air like this, sort of hovering in one spot menacingly. It looks like it's radiating lights, either with a seriously reflective surface, or it's producing them itself and kind of just vibing up there in the clouds. Worth noting is that across several reports of unexplained phenomena and mysterious crafts reported by Air Force and Navy pilots, one of the more repeated ones was strange cylindrical craft, and a comparison very frequently was made of a floating cigar. And whatever this is certainly does look like a floating cigar, enough to give me a bit of pause, but I also read hundreds upon hundreds of alien stories and watch UFO videos all day, so I'm more of a tinfoil hat conspiracist than the average duck. You know what this kind of reminds me of though? Is that little gadget in Men in Black that they use to erase everybody's mind when they see something they're not supposed to. Looks a ton like that to me. Maybe that was the point of this thing. A mass amnesiac designed to quickly flash over the population and erase any recent memories of UFO and UAP spottings. That, or it's just like a weird weather balloon. That's what it ends up being like 99.9% of the time. Number 2. Floating triangle. Now our next clip is another one shared to Reddit, and hey, while I'm here, shout out to the UFO subreddit for making finding clips of alien crafts just so much easier than it was a few years ago. You gotta love the information age. Now, keep your eyes peeled for this next one coming up because it is a serious doozy. I had to do a little bit of digging for this clip, put on my newsman fedora, try and get down to business, but from what I could turn up, this footage was captured somewhere soaring over Guatemala City. In the video, we can see what is a pretty clear triangle shape flying through the air with blinding bright lights casting down onto the surface. This clip to me has that feel of UFO footage, you know, the vibe. It looks a bit like something that could have come out of a movie, which does almost make me feel like maybe it's too good to be true. Of course, there's also the possibility that whatever I'm looking at right now is just a very advanced spy plane seen from down below and giving off a very unique silhouette. Like the cigar clip before it, black triangle UFOs are one of the more commonly reported descriptions of UFOs. In fact, even on the comments of this clip are several commenters stating that they've all seen similar things. Now, obviously, take that with a grain of salt, of course, because they're YouTube comments. No offense to my beloved YouTube commenters, you know I love you. But it does help paint the picture that whatever is happening has happened more than once. Now, my theory for this clip is I think this most likely is something military and advanced, and if I wanted to kind of get out there with my theorizing, which I do, it could potentially be something reverse engineered from recovered technology. Luis Elizondo, who I mention in these videos all the time, is a former US intelligence agent and a notable figure in the world of UFO discussions. And he's claimed multiple times that he knows that the US has reverse engineered craft from recovered UFO parts and has insisted a few times that the craft in particular he is referring to is triangular in nature. Could this be what he's alluding to? Completely possible. Time will tell, of course. And number 1, Hawaii re-entry. I try to save the best clip for last, and I sure hope this doesn't disappoint. If that last one from Guatemala didn't have you convinced that there's tech out there we can't explain, why don't you try this on for size? This recently captured footage came to us from a Redditor, One Gold Breadfruit. Thank you. Take a look at this bizarre experience they caught pulling into Maui, Hawaii. If you're watching this on your phone, crank the brightness just for a few seconds and see if that helps out a bit. It almost seems like what we're looking at is something huge being rendered invisible by some cloaking technology, maybe on a loan from the Predator. What's throwing me most about this clip is just the size of whatever is being caught on camera here. Most UAP or UFO videos, it's pretty difficult to figure out how large something is when you're looking at a blurry dot in the sky. But here, it's almost like we're face to face with what looks like a massive craft. Some commenters have suggested that what you're looking at right now is a satellite re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, citing a particular event in 2008 as proof, though the footage is dated from 2020, so not entirely sure. Some other commenters argued that it didn't look like something re-entering the atmosphere as there was no visible trails of any kind on the craft as it entered. I can't say too much about that. I am not a rocket scientist even remotely. Just look at me. I'm not giving off rocket scientist vibes. I'm a YouTuber and I'm a UFO enthusiast. If you have some insight, I am definitely all ears. But until then, I'll probably just be watching these clips over and over again, pausing frame by frame in a dark basement like I'm Agent Mulder sitting alone trying to get to the bottom of this. I just want to believe, darn it.